In this video, I'm going to talk about preparing for the evidence exam, approaching an evidence exam question in the exam room, and I'll also give you a few tips on multiple choice questions. The exam will cover the entire semester and will be in two parts separately timed. There will be a multiple choice portion and also a traditional essay question or questions. Evidence is a big subject, and we've covered a lot of rules over the course of the semester. Spotting the issue is critically important in evidence, and it can be very difficult to do given the breadth of what we've covered over the semester. I suggest that you start by identifying the major categories of rules that we have covered. Using the rule numbers can help you here. You should also consider the major topics listed in the syllabus. For each major topic, I suggest that you visualize the facts or scenario that you would need to see in an essay question for the topic to be in play. In other words, you're trying to get yourself oriented on what the issue is by thinking through in advance what the issue will look like in an exam question. For example, hearsay. For a question to be asking you about hearsay, you have to see a proponent trying to introduce an out-of-court statement. That statement might be oral, so think about how it might appear in the exam question. It could appear in quotes. It could be a witness testifying that someone told her something, or someone said something, or someone threatened something. Or it could be a written statement. So look for a document, such as an email, a letter, or a report. There are many more examples in the hypo sheets. Let's try it again for impeachment. What would need to be in the question in order for the topic of impeachment to be at issue? Well, you would need to see the proponent attacking a witness's credibility. So you have to have a person who has testified or is testifying being attacked. Once you have done this for each major topic, then you should do it again for each individual rule. So visualize what facts or scenario you would need to see in an essay question for each rule to be in play. For excited utterances, for example, you would look for a startling event and a declarant under stress. For Rule 608B, which is trickier, go back to the rule. Look at the rule, think about the requirements, and think what has to be happening in order for it to be in play. For that rule, you need a witness on the witness stand being asked about her own past non-conviction misconduct. And that misconduct has to be probative of untruthfulness. Okay. Think about how it might appear in a question, and go back to the hypo sheets or the textbook and look for examples so you familiarize yourself with what brings it into play. Okay. It's also essential for each rule to create a checklist of the elements or requirements. You must know the rules. You must have a precise statement of the different requirements of the rule. I don't require you to know the rule verbatim from the rule book, but I will expect you to know each requirement using the key words for each rule. Okay, the rationale can help you remember a rule's requirements. A basic checklist for present sense impressions would include some kind of a memory tip, and then also a list of the requirements. So the statement must describe the event, and it must have been made during or immediately after the event, recognizing that the window closes at a maximum of 2 minutes. I think it's helpful to put these checklists in IRAC form, but at a minimum, you should have a list for each rule of every requirement that needs to be met. Okay, let's talk about what you might do in the exam to give yourself the best chance. In an essay exam, you have to do 5 tasks. I believe that you'll be more efficient and more effective if you do these tasks separately. First thing you need to do is read the question. Secondly, you must spot the issue. Third, you need to set up the structure of your answer. I think you should write this on your scratch paper before moving to the next step, and leave space underneath each requirement to fill in the facts that you are going to use when discussing that requirement. This is the checklist that I'm suggesting that you make in advance. Trying to figure this out in the pressure of an exam is a poor choice. You can figure this out in advance, and if you do, you'll be much better off in the exam itself. Okay, your fourth step is to figure out which facts to use and where they go. So go back through the question to find the facts for each requirement and fill them in on your essay outline. Once you've done all those tasks, you're finally ready to start writing the essay. Regardless of whether you start writing the minute the exam begins, or whether you do these 4 tasks separately and start writing the essay a little bit later, you have to do all 5 tasks. I think that you'll be much better off doing them separately, because you'll be able to give your full attention to each task rather than constantly disrupting yourself as you write by having to go back into the question and figure out what's at issue and which facts go where. All right, so let's look at each one of these tasks a little bit more carefully. Step 1 is to read the question. You need to be crystal clear on what I am asking you to do. For example, if I ask you whether a specific piece of evidence is admissible, you will only receive credit for your discussion of that issue. You will not receive credit for other extraneous things you write about. So if you're discussing whether other evidence is admissible, but it's not something I asked about, I will not give you credit. If you're talking about whether a witness can be impeached, the witness who's describing that piece of evidence can be impeached, you will not receive credit if I only asked you about the admissibility of that piece of evidence itself. Your second task is to spot the issue. Again, this can be very difficult to do. So start out by considering what the evidence is being offered to prove. Ask yourself, on what grounds could the opponent plausibly object? If there is no real issue about whether the evidence meets a rule, then I don't give credit for discussion of those rules. For example, if evidence is obviously relevant, I do not give credit for a discussion of relevance. If hearsay is obviously not applicable because there is no out-of-court statement, I do not give points for your discussion of why hearsay is not involved. You should check through, as you're spotting the issue, you should check through the major categories of rules that we've covered. Again, using the rule numbers can help you do this more systematically. Eliminate categories that obviously don't apply. Again, if there's no out-of-court statement, stop thinking about hearsay. And then focus more carefully on the categories that might apply. Figure out which specific rule applies, and again, having visualized in advance what kinds of facts you would see in the question will help you determine which rule is the right rule to be discussing. Your third step is to make a list of the major issues you need to cover for each rule or objection, put it in order, and also in IRAC form. Okay, so does the rule apply? Whatever rule it is, and then you'll put that in IRAC form. State the rule, apply each requirement to the facts, and conclude on whether the rule applies. You should also consider whether an exception to the rule applies. There might or might not be exceptions to that rule, but think about it. If there is an exception, again, use the IRAC form, and then do the same for any additional steps you might need to cover, such as Rule 403. Step 4 is to figure out which facts to use and how. Go back through the question to find facts for each requirement. Fill them in on your essay outline. Remember, In the previous step, you've written out your essay outline on your scratch paper, leaving room underneath each requirement for the facts. As you go through, underline each fact in the question that you use as you use it. At the end, you can then go back and more easily see which facts you've skipped over. Ask yourself whether any of those could be used in any of your arguments, and if so, plug them in. Also, remember to look for facts that cut both ways, or arguments that can be made on both sides. For each requirement, ask yourself, are there facts that show the requirement is met? Are there facts that show the requirement is not met? And finally, you've reached step 5, which is to write out your answer. This should be relatively straightforward if you've done the other 4 steps. Okay, I will expect your answer to be in IRAC form. In class, we're going to do a short practice question where I'll be asking you to use this 5-step approach, and we can talk about it in more detail then. To give you a rough sense of grading, I usually give 1 point for spotting the issue. I give 2 points for stating the rule correctly. And in terms of the application, where most of the points are allocated, I typically give 1 point for every relevant fact used, as long as it's an actual fact from the fact pattern and you use it in an argument. In other words, you explain how the fact matters. I also give points for conclusion, but typically only 1 point, and only if there were facts cutting both ways and you made the arguments on both sides, giving me a plausible reason for your choice. I do not give conclusion points if there were facts cutting both ways and a student argued only one side. Why? Because I don't think you can reach a sensible conclusion unless you've considered both sides of the issue. Also, please note that where there are facts cutting both ways, I am more interested in your ability to use those facts in arguments than in reaching a right result. I've often designed the question to make it a close call, and so I'm happy to have you resolve it either way as long as you give me a good reason. Okay, couple of study tips. First, to bridge the gap from your outline to the exam, I suggest you make IRAC checklists. In other words, get yourself ready to do step 3 in advance. You should give yourself an issue spotting tip. Again, ask yourself what you need to look for in the fact pattern. Write it down as an issue spotting tip in either your outline or your checklist. Memory tips are also helpful based on the rule's rationale. By the way, I think these IRAC checklists are incredibly helpful not only for the long essay, but also for multiple choice, which is highly dependent on knowing the details of how each requirement of each rule work. So creating the IRAC checklist will help you focus on the individual requirements and what you need to do with them. My second study tip is to take practice exams. I've posted a number of practice exams on TWEN in the exam prep folder. When you take practice exams, you should time yourself. I think you should use the 5-step approach. You should write your answer out in full. I've provided a grading key for every practice exam I've posted, and for a couple of them there are also sample answers as well. I have a couple of tips for you on multiple choice, but you'll need to go to a separate video to see them. That video is titled Tips on Multiple Choice. Thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you in class.